All right, today I'm going to talk about David and Goliath. Anyone here this morning or this afternoon believe in miracles? Do you believe that Yahweh still unleashes his miracle working power in the lives of his people? I believe that Yahweh not only is still performing miracles in the lives of his people, but the truth is he wants to. He's not only capable of performing miracles of healing, miracles of spiritual breakthrough, miracles that break through bondage to sin, miracles that break through bondage to addictions. The list is endless because his power is unlimited and his love for his people doesn't ever run out. To be honest, I believe you all believe in the power of Yahweh to perform miracles, to step into our lives and do something supernatural that we couldn't do on our own. It's not a matter of us not believing it can happen, but what I want to ask is simple. Will we see a miracle here in our lives or in our church? I believe, as I read scriptures and study the word, that we can put ourselves in miracle working territory. In other words, by our faith, by our actions, we can have access to Yahweh's miracle working power. And that's the place I want to live. On the other side, we can also put ourselves in a place where there is no power. There is no supernatural work going on. In other words, by our lack of faith, our lack of action, we can put a barrier between ourselves and Yahweh with miracle working powers. And that's not the place where I want to live. So let's investigate just one great event. Let's look for reasons that Yahweh's power was unleashed in the life of David. Why did Yahweh use this man to perform what seemed to be impossible? Why was this man so confident that Yahweh was going to perform a miracle on his behalf? What gave him the confidence? And maybe the most important question is the kind of miracle working power is available to me in my life, in our church, or in our battles. Now, one of the favorite stories is found in 1 Samuel chapter 17, the true historical event of Scripture. The epic battle between a giant warrior of a man named Goliath versus a young shepherd boy whose faith was bigger than the whole army of Israel. When we read this story, and I think this is what it would be like if I tried to step into the ring with Mike Tyson. This is what it would be like if I tried to outspend Bill Gates. The odds are stacked. But what we are going to read really happened. And David really did get into the ring. So, 1 Samuel 17. Now the Philistines gathered together their armies to battle and were gathered together at Shechem, which belonged to Judah, and pitched between Shechem and Azekah and Ephraim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together and pitched by the valley of Elah, and set the battle in array against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on a mountain on one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, and there was a valley between them. And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. And he had a helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass. He had greaves of brass upon his legs, and a target of brass between his shoulder. And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spearhead weighed 600 shekels of iron. And one bearing a shield went before him. He stood and cried unto the armies of Israel, and said unto them, Why are you come out to set your battle in array? Am not I a Philistine, and you servants to Saul? Choose you a man for you. Let him come down to me. If he be able to fight with me and to kill me, then will we be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then shall you be our servants and serve us. And the Philistine said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was the son of the Ephraimite, the Benjaminite, Judah, whose name was Jesse. And he had 8 sons, and the man went among men for an old man in the days of Saul. And the 3 eldest sons of Jesse went and followed Saul to battle. The names of his 3 sons that went to battle were Eliab, the firstborn. Next unto him is Abinadab, and the third Shema. And David was the youngest. And the 3 oldest followed Saul. But David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. And the Philistine drew near morning and evening, and presented himself 40 days. And Jesse said unto David his son, Take now for thy brethren an ephah of this parched corn, and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp to thy brother, and carry these 10 cheeses unto the captains of their thousands, and look how thy brethren fare, and take the pledge. Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. David rose up early in the morning, left the sheep with a keeper, and took and went as Jesse had commanded him, and he came to the trench as the host was going forth to the fight, and shouted for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had put the battle in array, army against army. David left his carriage in the hand of the keeper of the carriage, and ran into the army, and came and saluted his brethren. And as he talked with them, behold, there came up the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistine, and spoke according to the same words. And David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him, and were sore afraid. And the men of Israel said, Have you seen this man that is come up? Surely to defy Israel is he come up. And it shall be that the man who kills him, the king will enrich him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. And David spoke to the men that stood by him, saying, What shall be done to the man that kills this Philistine, and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living Elohim? And the people answered him after this manner, saying, So shall it be to the man that kills him. And Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spoke unto the men. And Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and said, Why came you down here? And with whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know thy pride and thy naughtiness of thy heart, for thou art come down that thou mightest see the battle. And David said, What have I now done? Is there not a cause? And he turned from him towards another, and spoke after the same manner, and the people answered him again after the former manner. And when the words were heard, which David spoke, they rehearsed them before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, Let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with the Philistine. And Saul said to David, Thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he is a man of war from his youth. David said unto Saul, Thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he rose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living Elohim. David said, moreover, Yahweh that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said unto David, Go, and Yahweh be with you. Saul armed David with his armor. He put on a helmet of brass upon his head. He also armed him with a coat of mail. And David girded his sword upon his armor, and he essayed to go, for he had not proved it. And David said unto Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them. And David put them off him, and he took his staff in his hand, and chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook, and put them in the shepherd's bag which he had, even in a scrip, and his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. And the Philistine came on and drew near unto David, and the man that bare the shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, and ruddy, and of fair countenance. And the Philistine said unto David, Am I a dog that thou shalt comest to me with staves? The Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, Come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air, and to the beasts of the field. Then said David to the Philistine, Thou come to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a shield. But I come to thee in the name of Yahweh of hosts, the Elohim of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day will Yahweh deliver thee into my hand, and I will smite thee, and take thy head from thee, and I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air, and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is an Elohim in Israel. And all this assembly shall know that Yahweh saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is Yahweh's. And he will give you into our hands. And it came to pass, when the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, that David hastened and ran towards the army to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag, and took there a stone, and slang it, and smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and smote the Philistine, and slew him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood upon the Philistine, and took his sword, and drew it out of the sheath thereof, and slew him, and cut off his head therewith. And when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. And the men of Israel and of Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines until they come to the valley and to the gates of Ekron. And the wounded of the Philistines fell down by the way of Shaaraim, even unto Gath and unto Ekron. And the children of Israel returned from chasing after the Philistines, and they spoiled the tents. David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. And when Saul saw David go forth against the Philistine, he said unto Abner, the captain of the host, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner says, As thy soul liveth, O king, I cannot tell. The king said, Inquire thou whose son the stripling is. And as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said unto him, Whose son art thou, young man? David answered, I am the son of thy servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite. One of my... Okay. So we have this story, and I want to answer those 3 questions I raised. The first one is, why did Yahweh use this man to perform what seemed to be impossible? One thing that I find as I read this story is that Yahweh just didn't pick anyone to take on the giant. Yahweh wasn't up in heaven playing eeny, meeny, miny, moe. Who can I send to go? As we look at the life of David, we are asking ourselves, why did Yahweh pick David? As you study the life of David, we realize that, first of all, David didn't have it really easy. He didn't have a real easy life. He was the youngest brother of 8 brothers. He was the baby. And don't you know, he was picked on by his older brothers. How many of you have older brothers or sisters? Did they tend to pick on you too?
No, I'm a big.
Of course they did. I know they did because I did it to my younger brothers and sisters.
Yes, we did, didn't we?
In chapter 16 of 1 Samuel, we find that the prophet Samuel has been ordered by Yahweh to anoint the next king of Israel. Yahweh ordered Samuel to go to David's father's house. Jesse was David's father's name. Samuel started looking over these brothers to find the one that Yahweh wanted to become the next king of Israel. Samuel saw the oldest son, Eliab, and thought, surely Yahweh's anointed stands here before Yahweh. Do you know what Yahweh answered Samuel? Listen to his words found in 1 Samuel 16, verse 7. But Yahweh said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. Yahweh does not look at the things man looks at. Man looks at the outward appearance, but Yahweh looks at the heart. My question was simply, why did Yahweh use this man to perform what seemed to be impossible? Why did Yahweh use David to perform this awesome miracle? What caused Yahweh to choose David not only as the one who would fight Goliath, but also the next king of Israel? Was it because he was of his good looks? Was it because of his great fighting ability? Was it because of his personal wealth? Was it based on his intelligence? No, none of these things. None of these things came into play. Because Yahweh doesn't choose his leaders. Yahweh doesn't choose his miracle workers based on the same things that we look at. Yahweh looks at the heart. What does Yahweh see when he looks at your heart? Does Yahweh see a heart full of faith? Does Yahweh see a heart full of trust? How's your heart? Is it healthy with faith? A lot of people and some believers are infected with heart disease. Not the kind the American Heart Association deals with, but many people are struggling with a diseased heart that lacks faith. Their heart lacks trust in Yeshua Messiah. They say they believe with their mouth, but their lives and actions tell a different story. Haven't you read, by their fruits you will know them? How's your heart today? Let me tell you a secret to having a strong, healthy heart. It's exercise. Now, I know that what your doctor told you last time you went to see him, but the same is true with our spiritual health. Exercise your faith. Put your faith into action. It's one thing to say you believe with your lips. Oh, I believe. It's another to act upon your belief. Do you have faith in Yahweh, in what Yeshua has done for you? Exercise by telling someone what Yeshua has done for you. Exercise your heart of faith through prayer. By being a prayer warrior. Pray at home. Pray for those who are lost. Exercise your faith through prayer. Are you exercising your faith through giving? What does Yahweh look at when he's looking for a leader? When he's looking for someone to use to perform a miracle? Yahweh looks at the heart. And as we investigate, we know that Yahweh is looking for in a man and a woman in whom he will perform a miracle, a heart of faith, a pure heart. Second, why was this man so confident that Yahweh was going to perform a miracle on his behalf? What gave him this confidence? The battle lines have been drawn. The Philistines are obviously the aggressors. They have a champion warrior named Goliath who has been trained since his youth for battle. The word tells us that he is one awesome specimen to look at. Now, we just read cubits, the old measurements. That transfers over to our measurements. The man was 9 feet tall. Not 6 feet, not 7. He was 9 feet tall. His armor of bronze, they told just how much it weighed in their measurements. Our measurements comes out to 125 pounds. The iron point of his spear weighed 15 pounds. Can you imagine the strength it would take to throw that spear? When I was in junior high, I tried to shot put. It's a steel ball. It weighed 12 pounds, less than what the spear weighed. And it took all I could take to throw this thing. Can you imagine trying to throw a spear with 15-pound point on it? It would dislocate everything in your arm. The point is, this guy was a giant man. This man was not only physically intimidating, like all good bullies, he had a loud mouth on him. The Bible tells us that every day for 40 days, he's been coming and standing in the open, defying the Israel army. And worse than that, he openly mocked the Elohim of Israel. You see, the Philistines believed that by bringing out 2 warriors to fight the 2 sides, that the Elohim of those 2 armies would determine the winner. You know what? They were right. The problem was, his Elohim, Goliath, didn't really exist. David's dead. So what gave David such confidence? Why did David march right up to the front lines and know that he would be the one to defeat this giant man? Does David sound scared to you? Does he sound intimidated to you? Listen to his words in verse 26. David asked the men standing near him, "What will be done for the man who kills the Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living Elohim?" Let me tell you why David had so much confidence. David had a history with Yahweh. David had seen Yahweh's hand at work in his life before. Where, you might ask? Was it on some grand stage? Was it somewhere only the elect get to go before Yahweh uses them? No. David saw Yahweh's hand in everyday duties of life. For David, his everyday duties included tending sheep. A big part of tending sheep is protecting them from wild animals. And David had learned to trust Yahweh as he had fought off wild bears and wild lions from his herd. David gained this great confidence from his experiences with Yahweh found in everyday life. Now I'm asking you, are you experiencing Yahweh on an everyday life level? Are you learning to trust Him and have faith in Him for your everyday duties? When you go to work, are you in tune with Him? When you deal with your children every day, is Yahweh involved and invited to help you, to guide you in your instruction and your discipline? Is He your source? How are you gaining great confidence from your experience with Yahweh found in your everyday life? I believe that we can position ourselves to be used by Yahweh in miracle-working ways if we live lives that exercises our faith in Yahweh. Notice I didn't say for you to just exercise faith, but the key is to exercise faith in Yahweh. There is a lot of people sitting in churches today who are exercising faith, but they know nothing about having a faith in Yahweh. A personal faith and a personal Elohim who wants a personal encounter with us. We can have faith in a lot of things that won't make a difference. Faith in religion. Putting your faith in people will disappoint you. If your faith is in your own ability, it will fail you. If your faith is in your wealth, it too will fail you. David was a champion of faith because he exercised a personal faith in Yahweh. His faith was not static, but it was ever growing. It was being tested. It was being stretched. Our faith in Yahweh comes with a decision. But then it will continue to grow and be shaped by Yahweh as he uses our life events to shape us into this man or this woman. David's confidence came from his track record of faith and trust in Yahweh. This is where we can draw from also. The final question is, as we investigate this awesome story of David versus Goliath, is this. Is this kind of miracle-working power available to me in my life, in our church, in our battles? The answer to that question depends on your perspective. There's two perspectives we find in this story. Saul's perspective, which rubbed off on all of his army, all of his troops. And then there's David's perspective. Saul's is one that we can see pretty clearly in our world today. It's important to note a couple of facts as we begin to talk about these two. First, your position of power or prestige has no bearing on your perspective. It's a choice that we all can make, no matter your circumstances, no matter your position in life. Saul is the king of Israel. He knew that Yahweh had made a covenant with Israel that declared that Yahweh would always fight their battles for them. And if they would put their faith and confidence in him, they would be victorious. And throughout Scripture, we see how Yahweh always keeps his promise as the Israelites won victory after victory as they took possession of the promised land. In other words, Saul should have known better. Just because you know what the Bible says, just because you've been raised in the church, just because you are in church every week, just because you may be a teacher or a leader in church, none of those things mean that you automatically have the right perspective. Saul had all the outward appearance of someone who should have known Yahweh's power and his promises, but Saul looked out across the battlefield and saw this giant, and fear seized him. And all of his troops were seized with fear. Instead of looking to Yahweh in this time of testing, Saul decided to look at the circumstances, and he was paralyzed by what he saw. His perspective didn't allow him to see the living Elohim. Instead, all he could see was the giant and doom and gloom. In contrast, we see David. As soon as he shows up, he runs to the front of the line and he looks and sees what's going on. And he doesn't have to sit around and try to figure out what it might cost him. He doesn't have to make a pros and cons list on whether or not he should get involved. David's perspective helps him to see clearly that this is miracle-working territory. David sees an opportunity for Yahweh's name to be glorified, for his power to be unleashed. David sees something completely different than everyone else that day. David wasn't the most popular person because of it. David's brother was angry with him, jealous maybe of him, and I'm sure many others in the army felt the same way. Whenever you take a stand because of your faith and your trust in Yahweh, it will be met with skepticism and even disdain. Maybe even from within the ranks. Those who can't see Yahweh because their perspective is only on the giants, the circumstances, the problems. These folks will always be against those who live by faith and not by sight. Why? Because those without faith are afraid of what they can't see. David saw victory even though no one else could see that day. Everyone else saw defeat. And I ask you, what do you see in your life? Are you faced with some giants? I know I am. We are. Is your perspective one of faith and trust in Yahweh, like our hero David? Or do you find yourself more on Saul's side, always looking at the circumstances and becoming discouraged and defeated? 1 Samuel 17:45, then David said to the Philistine, thou comest to me with a sword and with a spear and with a shield, but I come to you in the name of Yahweh of hosts, the Elohim of the armies of Israel, who thou hast defied. This day will Yahweh deliver thee unto my hand, and I will smite you, and take thy head from thee, and I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistine this day unto the fowls of the air, and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is an Elohim in Israel. And all this assembly shall know that Yahweh saves not by sword or spear, for the battle is Yahweh's, and he will give you into our hands. And it came to pass, when the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, that David hastened, ran towards the army to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag, took there a stone, slang it, and smote the Philistine in the forehead, and the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon the face of the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and smote the Philistine, and slew him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. So David ran, he stood upon his 9-foot person, he drew his sword out of his sheath, and cut his head off. And when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. Some here have been living with Goliath in your life for long enough. I know people have been living with Goliath. I'm one of them. At some point, you decided that Goliath was unbeatable, so you were just going to have to put up with it, whatever that is. Let me tell you something. With faith, with power from the living Elohim, you can say to your Goliath, this day Yahweh will hand you over to me, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. You will believe if you will put your faith in Yahweh. That enemy that you have been struggling with for too long can be defeated today. No more excuses. No more running to the tents in fear. No more messages of doom and gloom. Know who you serve. You stand with the living Elohim and face the enemy, not alone, but with the living Elohim on your side. The Elohim who has defeated giants all through history. The Elohim who has promised victory for those who are washed in the blood. You can't do it alone. You're right about that. But Yahweh never asked you to do it alone. He's saying right now, let me do what you can't do. Trust me. Put your faith in me. I will provide the victory. Make your decision today to put your faith in Yahweh and know that He will perform miracles in your life. As you trust Him. Church and family, will we put our faith in Him? Will we live in fear? Will we sit around and say nothing is ever going to change? Are we looking at our circumstances and deciding that we will never find help? We won't do it. We will believe that Yahweh has a plan, and we will put our faith in Yahweh to carry out that plan through us. We will stop allowing fear and discouragement to creep into our minds and our conversations. Trust Yahweh and know that He is going to finish what He started. Do you believe in miracles? May Yahweh bless you with more than you ever asked for.